At the airport, my parents canceled my ticket and laughed. "Enjoy your taxi ride, loser!" I just smiled and said, "Okay." When they came back, they couldn't believe what they saw. The woman at the airline counter barely glanced at me as she repeated herself, that rehearsed, indifferent tone in her voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but your ticket has been cancelled." For a second, I thought I misheard her. Cancelled? That didn't make sense. My parents had booked this trip. I was supposed to be on that plane with them. I pulled out my phone, scrolling quickly to the confirmation email and showing it to her. "There has to be a mistake. My parents booked this flight for me. I'm supposed to leave today." She barely looked at the screen before shaking her head. "I see the reservation here, but it was cancelled 2 days ago." My stomach dropped. 2 days ago? I knew exactly who had access to that ticket. The only people who could have cancelled it were my parents. And just as the realization hit me, my phone buzzed in my hand. A message from my mother. "Enjoy your taxi ride home, loser. Happy New Year!" For a second, I just stared at it. I must have read it 3 times, waiting for my brain to catch up. Waiting for some kind of explanation that wasn't just this. But no. No mistake. No excuse. Just that one line. I wasn't shocked. Not really. This was just another in a long line of jokes at my expense, another reminder that I was an outsider in my own family. My parents had always favored my younger sister, Katie. She was the golden child, the one who got the brand new car at 16, the one they bragged about at family events, the one who could do no wrong. And me? I was just there. I should have expected something like this. But even for them, this was low. I clenched my jaw and typed back a single reply. "There's a surprise for you when you get back." I hit send and watched as the little read notification popped up almost instantly. A second later, my mom was calling. I let it ring. She called again. And again. I just slipped my phone into my pocket, turned on my heel, and walked right out of that airport. Because they thought this was the end of the joke. They had no idea that this was just the beginning. I walked out of the airport with my hands in my pockets, the cold wind biting at my face. Most people would have been furious, humiliated, or panicked. But me? I smiled. Because they thought they had won. They thought I'd be scrambling, calling for help, begging them to fix what they had done. They thought I'd be stranded, humiliated, stuck in a cab on my way back to the apartment I was barely holding on to. But they had no idea. I had been planning for this moment for a long time. For years I had been the one picking up the slack in the family. Paying off their debts when they fell behind, helping with repairs on the house, even covering Katie's college tuition when my parents claimed they just didn't have enough, and told me it was my duty as her brother to help. They took and took and took, always with that same condescending smile, acting like I was lucky to be included at all. But I had learned something over the years. When people like that think you're dependent on them, they never see it coming when you finally walk away. And I wasn't just walking away. I was burning the whole bridge behind me. The first thing I did when I got home was grab the folder from my desk, the one I had been quietly building for months. Inside were 2 things: documents for the car I had gifted my mom on her last birthday and paperwork for the joint savings account my father had convinced me to open. For emergencies. The car? Still in my name. The account? Mostly filled with money I had contributed. They thought they could humiliate me and leave me stranded? Fine. I was going to hit them where it actually hurt. Within an hour, I had a buyer lined up for the car. It was a newer model, barely a year old, and I knew it would sell fast. A guy messaged me back almost immediately, offering cash. I accepted. As for the savings account? A few clicks later, and every last cent was transferred into my personal account. By the time my mom called again, I was already on my way to meet the buyer. I ignored her. Then my dad tried. Declined. Even Katie sent a half-hearted, "Mom's freaking out. Just answer her." I didn't. They could stew in it. By midnight I was home, $6,000 richer from the car sale and feeling lighter than I had in years. The real fun would begin when they got back. And they had no idea what was waiting for them. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of missed calls and texts. My parents must have realized what I had done because now the messages weren't smug or taunting. They were angry. Mom, where is my car? Dad, you had no right to touch that money. That was yours. Mom, are you out of your mind? We were just joking. Call me back now. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee as I scrolled through them, completely unfazed. A joke? Right. Like all the other jokes over the years. Like the time they told me I wasn't really planned, that they only had me because you can't return a baby. Like the time they accidentally forgot my college application fees but made sure Katie had everything paid for. Funny how their jokes were always at my expense. I could almost picture their faces now. Sitting in some luxury resort, expecting to bask in the glow of their little prank, only to realize that I had turned the tables. They weren't going to be laughing when they landed back home. I had already taken the first steps in cutting myself free. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. I opened my laptop and pulled up an email I had saved as a draft weeks ago. Subject: resignation. For years I had been working at my father's company, a small but profitable construction business that he had always dangled over my head like a leash. It was always, be grateful we gave you a job. You wouldn't last anywhere else. This business will be yours someday if you prove you're worthy. I had bought into that lie for too long. But the truth? I was never getting the business. That was always going to Katie's future husband. My dad had already hinted at it multiple times. And I wasn't just quitting. I was taking a better offer. Months ago, I had started networking on my own, reaching out to people outside my father's circle. It had paid off. A competitor, one my dad hated, had offered me a position months ago, but I had hesitated. Not because of loyalty, but because I wanted to make sure the timing was right. Now, there was nothing holding me back. I hit send. A minute later, my phone buzzed. It was my new boss. Welcome aboard. We're lucky to have you. Yeah. Lucky. I exhaled, shutting my laptop. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was winning. And my parents had no idea what was coming next. I didn't have to wait long for the fireworks to start. By the time my parents' flight landed, my phone was vibrating nonstop with calls and texts. I ignored every single one. Then came the knocks on my door. It started with my mother. Open this door right now. She hissed through the wood, her voice barely controlled. We need to talk. I took my time before answering, letting her stew for a moment. When I finally opened the door, I was greeted by my mother's furious, red-faced glare. My father stood a step behind her, arms crossed, nostrils flaring. Katie was there too, though she stayed back, pretending to be more amused than anything. But I knew her well enough to see the tension in her jaw. Good. They had expected me to be groveling when they got home. Instead, I was calm. Relaxed even. You stole my car. My mother spat. I leaned against the doorframe. No. I sold my car. She reeled back like I had slapped her. You bought that from me. I shrugged. Yeah. And then I realized I didn't owe you anything. Her hands curled into fists. And the savings account? That was a family fund. I let out a laugh at that one. No, Mom. That was my money. You just got used to thinking of it as yours. My father stepped forward, trying to pull his usual act, the deep-voiced, intimidating father figure. It had worked when I was a kid. It didn't work now. Enough of this nonsense, he growled. You're acting like a child. We had a little fun at your expense, and you throw a tantrum like this? I tilted my head. Right. A little fun. It was a joke. My mother snapped. And now you're being cruel. You embarrassed us, humiliated us. Oh, you mean like how you left me stranded at the airport? I shot back. Like how you've treated me as nothing but a backup plan my whole life? Silence. For the first time, my parents looked uncertain. Katie stepped in then, rolling her eyes. Come on, you're being dramatic. You were fine. It's not like you actually needed that ticket. I turned to her, finally letting my amusement show. You're right. I didn't need it. And I don't need any of you either. Their faces shifted, confusion flickering in their expressions. And then I hit them with the final blow. Oh, and by the way? I quit Dad's company. My father's face paled. You did what? I took a better offer. I smirked. You know, from the guys you've been competing with for years? Turns out they actually appreciate my work. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. His company was already struggling, and losing me, his most reliable worker, was going to make things even worse. Katie's jaw dropped. You left? Just like that? Just like that. My mother's voice came out in a whisper. You can't do this to us. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I smiled. I already did. And with that, I shut the door in their faces. I stood there for a moment, listening as they fumed outside. My mother muttering about how I was out of control. My father swearing under his breath. Katie scoffing, calling me insane. I just smiled to myself. Because for the first time in my life, I was finally free. For the next few days, my phone was eerily silent. No angry texts. No guilt-tripping calls. Nothing. I knew what that meant. They weren't giving up. They were planning their next move. And sure enough, it came in the form of a visit from my uncle. Uncle Dave had always been the reasonable one in the family. The mediator. The guy my parents sent in when they needed to guilt me without doing it themselves. He sat across from me at a cafe, stirring his coffee like he was preparing for a long speech. Look, he started. I get why you're upset. Your parents screwed up. But don't you think you've made your point? I took a sip of my own coffee, waiting. They're your family, he continued. They love you. You don't want to burn bridges over one bad decision, do you? I set my cup down and met his gaze. Uncle Dave, where was this energy when they left me stranded at an airport? He sighed. They didn't mean any harm. I let out a dry laugh. No, they just meant to remind me that I'm nothing to them unless they can use me. He had no response to that. Just a long, uncomfortable silence. After a moment, he nodded slowly, like he finally understood. So that's it then? I nodded. That's it. He sighed again, standing up. Well, I hope you know what you're doing. I smiled. For the first time? I do. And just like that, the last string tying me to them was cut. A few days later, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. Mom, we need to talk. Please. I ignored it. An hour later, another message. Mom, we're struggling, you know. Your father's business is in trouble. We could really use your help. There it was. Not an apology. Not even an acknowledgement of what they did. Just a demand wrapped in fake concern. I didn't reply. That evening, another text came in. This time from Katie. Katie. Wow. So you're really just going to let Mom and Dad suffer? You're so selfish. I laughed to myself. Me? Selfish? I typed back a single response. Me. I learned from the best. Blocked. I wasn't playing their game anymore. And for the first time in my life, it felt incredible. A week passed without a word. I knew my silence was driving them insane. My entire life, they had controlled me through guilt, through obligation. The moment I stopped playing along, their power over me disappeared. But I wasn't stupid. I knew they weren't done. Sure enough, my aunt, the only decent relative I had, called me one evening. I hesitated before picking up, but when I did, her voice was laced with frustration. What exactly did you do? She asked. I smirked. What do you mean? Your parents are a mess. She sighed. Your mom won't stop crying, your dad's furious, and Katie's walking around acting like the world is ending. I leaned back on my couch, amused. Sounds rough. You know why. She pressed. Your dad's business is falling apart without you. He can't keep up with the workload, and now he's struggling to find decent employees. Good. I knew how much my father relied on me. He had always assumed I'd never leave, never realize my worth. But I had, and now he was paying the price. They want me back, don't they? I asked. Of course they do. She scoffed. But they won't say it. Your dad's too proud, and your mom just keeps playing the victim. But between you and me? She lowered her voice. They're scared. They don't know what to do without you. I let that sink in. All my life, they made me feel like I needed them. Like I was lucky they kept me around. But now, the truth was clear. They were the ones who needed me. Let them figure it out, I said simply. My aunt sighed. I thought you'd say that. There was a pause, then she added. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. That surprised me. Really? Yeah. I know how they've treated you, and I know how hard this must have been. But you're finally standing up for yourself. They never expected that. I smiled. Neither did I. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet, letting the weight of everything settle. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a forgotten son. I wasn't their punching bag. I was free. And they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. Days passed. Then a week. The silence stretched longer than I expected. I knew my parents. They weren't the type to accept defeat. If they weren't contacting me, it was because they were working on something. And then, right on cue, my doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. Mom. Dad. Katie. I sighed. I could have ignored them, but a part of me wanted to see what they had to say now that they had lost all control over me. So, I opened the door. What do you want? I asked, leaning against the frame. My mother stepped forward, her face tight with forced concern. Sweetheart, we just want to talk. I said nothing. Just stared. She shifted uncomfortably. We've been thinking a lot, and we may have overreacted at the airport. I raised an eyebrow. Overreacted? Yes. She continued quickly, her voice taking on that sickly sweet tone she used when she was trying to manipulate me. We never meant to hurt you. We just wanted to have some fun. I folded my arms. So, you're saying canceling my ticket and abandoning me was just a fun little joke? Well, she faltered. You have to admit you took it too far. Selling the car? Taking all the money? Quitting your father's company? That was cruel. Ah. There it was. The truth behind their visit. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to make me feel guilty. To paint me as the villain. I smirked. And what do you expect me to do about that? My father finally spoke up, his voice gruff. You've made your point. Now it's time to come home. I blinked. Home? Yes, he said firmly. Come back to the company. We'll pretend this never happened. I let out a low laugh. You think I want to come back? After everything you've done? Katie scoffed. Oh, stop being so dramatic. You're punishing Mom and Dad for no reason. I turned to her, my amusement growing. No reason? You mean after years of being treated like I didn't matter? After being the one who was always expected to clean up your messes? Yeah, Katie. No reason at all. Her lips pressed into a thin line. My mother's patience finally snapped. We raised you. We gave you everything. I stared at her, my expression unreadable. No. You took everything. And you only loved me when I was useful to you. That shut her up. The silence stretched. Finally, my father gritted his teeth. You'll regret this. I tilted my head. I don't think I will. And with that, I stepped back and shut the door in their faces. I stood there for a moment, listening to their muffled complaints. Eventually, their voices faded, their footsteps retreating. And I smiled. Because they finally understood. I was never coming back. After that final confrontation, something strange happened. The guilt, the weight I had carried for years, was gone. No more checking my phone, dreading their messages. No more wondering if I was the problem. No more hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would change. I was done. And with that freedom came something else, opportunity. With the money I had reclaimed, I finally had choices. I moved into a better apartment, one that felt like mine instead of just a place to sleep. I invested in myself, upgrading my skills, focusing on my new job. And without my family constantly draining me, something incredible happened. I thrived. A month later, I got a message from my aunt. Aunt Lisa, your parents are struggling. Business is worse than ever. Katie moved back in with them. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Me. That's not my problem. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Months passed. Then a year. And in that time, I built something real. Something that had nothing to do with them. My new job? It was better than I ever expected. The company valued me, paid me well, and within 6 months, I was promoted. For the first time, I wasn't just working to survive, I was working towards something. With my finances finally under my control, I made smarter investments. I bought a car, not a flashy one, but one that was mine. I started traveling, seeing the world on my terms, not because my parents decided I was allowed to go. I even started taking classes in something I'd always been interested in but never had time for, photography. And socially? Well, something interesting happened. Without my family weighing me down, I had more time for people who actually cared about me. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating someone who, for the first time, treated me like I mattered. I was happy. And my parents? They were falling apart. I didn't go looking for updates, but they came anyway. Family members whispered about how my father's company was barely staying afloat. How without me handling the hard work, things kept slipping through the cracks. Then came the real bombshell. One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Hello? There was silence on the other end. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Hey, it's Katie. I almost laughed out loud. Of course it was. What do you want? I asked flatly. She hesitated. Look, things have been rough at home. Mom and Dad are having a hard time, and well, I was thinking maybe we could grab coffee. Catch up. I leaned back in my chair smirking. Catch up? Yeah. And this sudden interest in catching up wouldn't have anything to do with the fact that you all need money, would it? Another pause. Then a sigh. Come on, it's not like that. I chuckled. Yes, it is. And you know what? I'm not mad. I actually appreciate this call. She sounded confused. You do? Yeah, I said, smiling. Because it proves I made the right choice. And then I hung up. I blocked her number. And that was the last time I ever heard from them. There was a time when I thought I couldn't survive without my family. When I believed that no matter how badly they treated me, I had to keep proving myself. That I had to earn my place. But now, I knew the truth. I had been so much more than they ever let me believe. And the second I walked away, the second I took control of my own life, I thrived. And the best part? They had no access to it. No claim over my success. No control over my happiness. They had spent their whole lives treating me like I was less than. But now they were the ones struggling to get by. And I was free.